Hi, this is Christopher Scott with Think Youth, and you are listening to the Think Youth Podcast.
I'm just trying to save this money up. I'm just trying to stack this money up. I'm just trying to make it work for me when I die. I know damn sure I can't take it with me. I'm just trying to save this money up. I'm just trying to stack this money up. I'm just trying to make it work for me when I die. I know damn sure I can't take it with me.
So this is going to be my first podcast. I've never done a podcast before. This whole idea started from the thought that I was going to create or some type of educational building where kids can come and learn about art and things like that. That very well may happen down the line, but now it's a online publication. You can actually visit it at medium.com/thinkyouth. Video has been uploaded as well. It's available on our Facebook page, which I'll make sure I put in the description. And now we're at a podcast. And our first interviewee is Dr. Melissa Crum. She is a entrepreneur specialist. She is the artist and author and researcher and the owner of Mosaic Education Network. Mosaic Education Network is a consulting company that helps educators and nonprofit leaders build stronger relationships with the diverse communities they serve by infusing the arts, storytelling, and critical thinking into like a professional development, community building, and curriculum development. She is highly accredited. She earned her bachelor's in visual art studies from the University of Florida, her master's in African American and African studies, and her PhD in art administration, education, and policy from the Ohio State University. Let's go Buckeyes. So she has done a TED Talk. She's just an amazing individual. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the episode. And again, I want to thank you guys for listening. This is my first one. Appreciate it. So I know you've been fine. We've already, gone over that. So you mentioned during, your creative mornings talk about redlining.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at that article. That
I did. Mm-hmm.
So like and I wrote that last year this time. And so when you said that during the talk, I was like, oh, she gets it. So I'm not the only person, that has noticed that. And especially, having grown up in Richmond, Virginia, and then I lived in Atlanta, Georgia for about 2.5 years, and coming to Columbus, I started to see a trend. Yeah. Majority of my family, grew up in the south side of Richmond, it's traditionally African American community. And I always found it interesting that whenever I go to a major city, I always feel more at home in the south side of the city. And I started to do a little bit more research and just kind of figure out, why was it that when I would go to these major cities that it seemed to kind of have the same structure. And so if you don't mind, in your studies, I know that you are a big, pusher of diversity. So can you, talk to us a little bit, as far as, the redlining and how it has affected, our community, and what can be done, to possibly, change? Or is there a way to change since we can't necessarily reverse or, change paths in order to have a better outcome?
Yeah, so it's hard. That's a hard answer. It's a hard question because to get to the root of redlining, you have to get to the root of white supremacy and capitalism at the end of the day. And nobody wants to say that. Nobody wants to think about that. But that's ultimately what it is. And so I think there are some cities that are trying to slow down that process of gentrification. They're trying to, for example, giving tax abatements to homeowners to move in, or trying to make sure it's mixed income. But at the end of the day, we're seeing so much backlash from this historical redlining. So, for example, there's people doing work looking at infant mortality rates in historically redlined areas. So, for example, with Linden, seeing that this place that was redlined, which means there was a disinvestment there. There wasn't a purposeful, tactical strategy to actually support the people who live there. And so we're now seeing health issues. We're seeing a host of other things specifically happening in places that were redlined. And it's then folks want to go into those redline areas and then gentrify them. But what happens is you start pushing out the folks who were redlined in the first place, then they get pushed out somewhere else, and they get further away from any other resources. They're further away from their jobs, further away from schools, further away from other kinds of resources. But you got to think about who's doing the pushing, and then it just goes back to that kind of this idea of who has the ability to push whom out and for what reason. And we're seeing that definitely in Linden, but in Columbus, but we're, like you said, you're seeing it all over. And it's hard to say what to do about that other than what folks have been trying to do, such as get on the front end of it. Some of that means buying up as many assets as possible. So you're seeing some folks, when they're seeing gentrification coming, they gather up their resources and they start buying up property. So at the very least, if the property values get really high, then their value goes high too. And if they sell it or if they rent it or whatever, they're starting to be strategic. But in low-income areas, not a lot of people have access to capital in order to do that. Or the fund, any kind of funds to ensure that. So if they can grab hold of assets, that's great, but most people can't, so they end up getting pushed out. So it's kind of like the age-old question: how do you do that? Because this isn't new.
No, it's not. I think probably the biggest shock to me. My family is originally from Brooklyn, New York. So going back to Brooklyn, 25 years ago when I would go, like in my, when I was like 3, 4, going during the summertime, to see what it looks like now, it doesn't look anything like how it looked before.
Right.
And my great grandma, she is 93 years old, born and bred Brooklyn. The only reason why she moved out, and she reminds me, is because I was born, so she had to move to Virginia because my parents are military. And she said, 27 years I've been down here because of you. And when she went back, she was just like, I don't even think I could go anymore, because it's like you're walking down the street where you would normally see something. Those memories are not the same. It looks like a completely different city, and it's under the guise of saying, oh, we're trying to make the neighborhoods better. Are you making the neighborhoods better, or are you trying to erase history?
The question is, what's their definition of better? So if we look at an asset-based model where we're asking people from the neighborhood to say, yes, from the outside there are folks who would say these are the problems, but what do you see as some of the positive? If the positive is that, oh, I can get my favorite candy from this corner store because, I don't know, my cousin owns it, or all my family lives in the same block, or I know I can walk down this street because I have these family friends here and they own this dry cleaner right here. So there's something around community and space and all those types of things. But if better means, instead of that dry cleaners, it's Starbucks there, if better means that, yes, your family lives on the same block, but they don't have the funds to keep the edifice of their brownstone up, which makes the property values go down, then it's not better. But those things that some communities might privilege as assets, whoever's defining better isn't. And so when the people who are starting to strategically plan to remove those people, they have to include them in the conversation and potentially change their definition of better. I think that's a hard thing to do when their definition of better is grounded in monetary terms.
That's a deep statement. That's like the question Will asked last month, and I'm going to talk to him about this. He said,
Evans?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
He said, how do we diversify without appropriating?
Mm-hmm.
And what I've noticed, like, everybody has a bucket list. I always said I wanted to be the mayor of Richmond, Virginia one day. Because I saw, especially, I had family members that own property and own shops, and when the recession hit, we saw people that were in, more white-based neighborhoods. They were getting the funding that they needed, and they had access to a lot of these things that African American, shop owners, they didn't have knowledge of it, and they don't even know how to begin the process. And the biggest thing with me even starting the whole idea of Think Youth is that we're not all entertainers, because we can't all continue to be rappers and celebrities and athletes. We are more than that. And in us doing that, we need people that are going to be, in government, that are engineers, that are journalists, that are educators, because it makes a big difference. I ended up 2 to 3 years ago, I've always been interested in architect, and I didn't know I was interested in the way a city was laid out, and then I ended up finding an interest in city and regional planning, and then that turned into another thing. Then I started studying city maps because I wanted to buy property. Then I started looking at the parcel maps, in every city that I've gone, and then I noticed how things were lined out, and I was just like, my God. It was done on purpose. And even, I was fortunate enough to be raised in one of the oldest churches in Richmond, Virginia, 6 Mount Zion Baptist Church, and it is, when you're going down 95, you can see it off of the side. They purposely built that highway through there to separate the two neighborhoods. But, even, me being 27, people that are younger than me, even older than me, have no idea that ever happened or that it went on. And it's easier to move out to the suburbs. We even say, like, I was telling Sterling, we were going through Franklinton, I said, Franklinton is a different type of, low-income poverty. I'm just speaking. That's, white methods. That's where that is. It's different. I can go in King Lincoln and I'm going to see, African crackhead. I'm not going to be as nervous because I know my people. I've been around my people. But at the same time, we shouldn't even be nervous around our own people. We should be willing to invest into our own communities and neighborhoods, buying the assets. But like you said, we don't have the money, the resources to do it. Even as far as, I know that one thing that you push is being an entrepreneur. And I even, have thought of the idea of an art investor, to invest in the idea of people instead of just being about the bottom line and the dollar. Because I feel like if the people are taken care of, in that community, the community will grow. As far as what you're doing with Entrepreneur, can you speak on that a little bit as far as how it started and the idea behind it, and what you're accomplishing from it?
So, worked with the Barnett Center for Integrated Arts and Enterprise at Ohio State, and they were interested in figuring out what were some of the needs of art students and artists in the communities. And so we did a series of roundtables to find those things out. And so a few things came out of that. They were wanting to build more business skills, needing more time to focus on that business, and additional and space to be able to figure those things out. So the Barnett Center, as well as Creative Control Fest members, decided to come together with Mosaic to figure out how can we supply those things. And so what came out of that was the Entrepreneur Workshop Series, which focused on business skills. We're wanting to figure, and time, so we're giving them business skills in a concentrated space so they can have the time to actually focus on that. Ideally, the next would be able to have space, so having incubators for arts businesses or things like that. So that'd be the next step. But this is our second year. and we're growing, and it's really exciting that the city, or I shouldn't say the city, that we're getting investment from like Greater Columbus Arts Council, OSU, Steam Factory supporting us with space. So the goal is just to continue, to grow. And I think the entrepreneur or the private route to addressing social issues seems to be one of the most effective ways, and it seems to not be through politics. So some of the best agitators were outside of politics. They weren't politicians, because the folks that their constituents are rarely the ones who are agitating. So they have to conform to the folks who voted for them. And so if you're working outside of that space, you have a business, you are thinking creatively, how can you agitate those politicians? Because if we are engaged in what's going on with the city, and we believe that we have not only cultural capital, but we have other resources, and we made sure we let them know we voted for you, these are the things we need. And so we get enough buzz around it, then they'll do what they need to do, instead of us trying to get our artists or other folks actually into the political system, because then they can't just address us, they have to address everyone. So if we're focusing on one particular issue, and so I think when we want to make change, we got to figure out what that looks like in conjunction with politics. What does that look like on a entrepreneur basis? So, for example, I recently was in New Orleans, and I believe I was in the 9th Ward, but it was in a lower income space. And in the middle of it was a Whole Foods. And you never see a Whole Foods.
A Whole Foods, not a farmer's market?
Right, a Whole Foods in the middle of like this low income area. And I said, how did this happen? Looked into some things and found out there was a particular actor from New Orleans who raised the capital to put the Whole Foods there so that people in that neighborhood could have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. But what he also did was on the other side of that Whole Foods in that building, so one half was the grocery, the other half was a culinary school. So you had students from or individuals from the community around who wanted to learn other skills, whether they wanted to be a cook or chef or run their restaurant, whatever they wanted to do. They have a school there in the Whole Foods. So I thought that was amazing. Could I get a politician to do that? Probably not. But this person raised private money. This creative, this actor, raised this money to address a social ill in his city. And so I'm excited about what we can continue to do with the Entrepreneur Series, to really think about how can we merge creatives and entrepreneurship to address social ills, maybe alongside politics, maybe not, because I don't need a legislator to tell me I can or can't buy this piece of land. I'm just gonna buy it. I just need to get some other creators and some other investors around me. And when you can, so it sounds nice when we say we want to invest in neighborhoods, we invest in people, and it sounds great, but at the end of the day, it's not sustainable unless we can figure out how does the money flow. And when you talk to people like humanitarians who haven't run a nonprofit or something like that, then it sounds kind of blasphemous. Like, what do you mean? How does the money flow? How are we? Because you got to keep the lights on. Like, you got to eat. Like, that's a real thing. And a lot of nonprofits are running like for-profit businesses, minus the shareholding. And they might actually have shares if they have a for-profit arm of the nonprofit. Like, that's the thing. Churches are doing that when they're purchasing land and and having apartment complexes.
I've noticed that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not mad at it.
I found it. Dotson, Mr. William Dotson was telling me about that. I had a good 2-hour conversation with him.
Yeah.
Telling me about it.
And so they're a nonprofit with a for-profit arm, and if they're providing housing for their members, if they're doing, more power to you. And if you are a church that is solely based on weekly donations, I can see how that's unsustainable, like from a business model. So you got to figure out what's going to keep the lights on. From a business standpoint, it was different when you had one church in the middle of this whole town where everybody came. True. And like everybody was contributing to this church. You go down Cleveland, there's 38 churches. You know what I mean? True. Like it's like
barbershops and churches.
Barbershops and churches. So from a business standpoint, you're like, how do you pay your mortgage? How do you keep your lights on? Like that's a real thing. So in the same way, how do we think about what does investment in people, investment in neighborhoods look like from a business standpoint, from a social entrepreneurship standpoint, where we're able to keep the lights on, we're able to feed the people around us who also want to be in the room with the lights on. And I think there are people who are trying to do that, and some people that are effectively doing that in other ways. So how do we do that on a smaller scale in our neighborhoods? And I think that's possible. And I really like this idea of that Whole Foods in the middle of that space. What does that look like on Cleveland Avenue? What does it look like to have some creative version of North Market in the middle of Linden? Because we have a lot of people with businesses or business ideas, and they think they need a store. They think they need a brick and mortar something, or they're not quite sure how to have an online store account to sell their wares or whatever. So instead of trying to bridge that digital divide, why don't we figure out how to give you a space and offer you some skills to figure out how to promote yourself? So if you're able to rent out this little corner, just like in North Market, and you sell your earrings or your shea butter or your whatever, because everybody's selling shea butter, everybody's selling,
black soap because it's their moisture.
Yeah, now you gotta
talk about them, but
everybody's selling something.
It's true.
Everybody, the kids selling penny candy and whatever you're doing. Now you have a space, and you ask the city to invest and give a tax abatement to that. Like we can own this space, but we don't have to pay taxes for 15 years. And that money that we wouldn't have to pay goes to subsidizing these artists' studios or their storefronts within this warehouse, within this space. And that way you're saying we're elevating or creating more economic sustainability. People are creating their own jobs. It's staying within the neighborhood. They're controlling their space. And you're investing in the same way you invested with these other construction companies, giving them 15, 10, whatever tax abatements for these luxury apartments on Hudson. So you can't do that for folks who are trying to pull their own stuff by their bootstraps, whatever you want, whatever that kind of, what I feel is kind of a elitist way of thinking about how people who are may not have as many resources are supposed to act. So I think we can be strategic. I think we can figure that out. I'm really excited about what that could look like with the Entrepreneur Series in the future.
Thank you. I'm at a loss for words because last Saturday there's an old elementary school, it's at Bellows Avenue in Franklinton, and I went and looked at that building. He's like, I'm gonna lift you up, bro. I'm like, you're not dropping this. I looked inside, amazing bones, like amazing. One thing when I was in Atlanta, I had the opportunity to work out of OHUB. Rodney Sampson, I worked under Rodney Sampson, Paul Judge. I got to meet all of them, and how they started Opportunity Hub. It was like that. You had a chance to be a part of the ecosystem, the co-working space, and we paid like monthly, but they offered classes. for those people that were members, you got to take part in the classes, you got a chance to pitch to investors. It was bringing all those things to the individual. And I told them, I said, the building is beautiful in Franklinton, but I don't want it to be in Franklinton. But I said, if you can get, and then I took a picture and I posted it, and I had some friends just like, you need to buy it. So I know that I have people, that are willing with the right, ideas to invest in that idea. And I agree with you 1000%. Like the North Market idea, there was in Atlanta, it's not too far from, now I can't even think of the name of the hospital. I keep wanting to say Grant. Grant is here, right?
Yeah.
So it's another Grady.
Okay.
The other G. Grady Hospital, literally right down the street. Grady Hospital, it's like a market. And you would never know that it was there, and that is exactly, what it is. You have a market that's available to so many different people, and a lot of them, they started their businesses in that market. And I think, of course we had flea markets and stuff like that, but if it was, something that was more set up and, had more space, even if it had event space inside of that market, it's definitely doable. It serves multifunction. So I agree with you 15,000%. And even with this whole thing, we're pretty much done recording now, so we're good. Even with this whole thing, I was just like, I wanted to be out, doing it for the kids nonprofit, because there was not an example of like what I wanted to be necessarily growing up. I didn't see one that looked like me. I didn't even, everybody takes different paths to get to where they're at. And there was just like, well, you can do it. And my grandma's different. She doesn't like me doing stuff for free, because she's like, you're too talented to do stuff for free. You need to figure out how you're gonna make money off of it. It's gonna have to be, for profit. And I just didn't want, in it being for profit, for it to diminish the mission and the goal. And that was, that's like my biggest thing with it just being for profit. But this is just continuing to grow and to develop. It's turning to almost a publication or a news space for us to talk about our issues. How is a white person going to tell us about our culture? Like, I don't want you dictating the news. I wanted to hear from an actual individual. I don't need I'm not saying you can't study, but a Caucasian person telling me about my community and doing studies on my community, you're not from the community. I don't think it's also even going to be received the same way. When I see it's coming from you, another person that looks like me, it's just like, okay, you actually care and you know what you're talking about. So I think that's important. And so I'm trying to find it. And it's not even just, people of color. I got friends, that are Pakistani, Native American. I'm going to meet with Miss Celeste. She's another individual. I just think, those spaces, it needs to be told.
Absolutely.
So again, I definitely appreciate you.
No problem.
15,000%. I work at AT&T, my 9 to 5. I literally work like 4 doubles, and I'm off for like the next 9 days.
Oh,
so that's
wow.
how I'm trying to do everything I can, in this short time frame, and balance, home life.
Make sure you rest. But I do want to drop something maybe for you to consider. There's think about what do you think your nonprofit can do that your for-profit can't,
okay,
and vice versa.
Okay.
And think about what is the back door work in a nonprofit versus a for-profit. So what I mean is, a lot of times you'll find people who want a nonprofit who end up doing more of the work to sustain the nonprofit than the actual work that they want the nonprofit to do. So that means finding the board, maintaining the board, whatever articles of whatever corporation you need to create, all your constitution, all this stuff, and just maintaining individuals, and making sure you're picking the right ones, not just us like kind of picking our friends to be on the board. Like, what do you actually bring?
Yeah, make sure what are you gonna bring to the table? What are you good at? You're good at accounting. What are you good at writing grants? Like,
right, and they have to be really dedicated to it, because they're not only doing it for free. They should be paying, right, as board members, whether they're paying in actual cash, which they should be, or in the beginning it's a lot of sweat equity. So I started thinking that when I first began, I said I wanted a nonprofit. You have access to a substantial amount of potential money. But when I work with nonprofits and I do their grant writing and I do things like that, it's a lot of work with possible pay. Where if you do for-profit route, it is work, but there isn't the same kind of paperwork accountability on the for-profit end. So thinking about how can I structure this in order to have consistent money, kind of like going back to churches, right? So they're nonprofit, so they have to focus on donations or they got to focus on grants in order to get money. So that means, even with great grant writers, maybe it's like 1 out of every 4 grants you actually get. So how much work did you have to put in to get that grant?
I've been a part of a few churches and building a few churches and writing, Whirlpool, you name it, trying to see if they'll be willing to donate certain things.
It's a lot.
Yes.
But so for me, I felt like I had a greater return putting that same amount of effort into marketing myself to get paid gigs. See what I'm saying? Like the same amount of energy so that money then, if it's for profit, can still be saved, can still be invested to use to do something else, whether that's buy a building, whether that's whatever. And that's not to dissuade you either way, it's just to consider what are the pros and cons. And maybe you've already done that, but I try to tell folks like the nonprofit route might be, you might end up having to do more work to sustain it than to actually do the work that you want to do, that you want the nonprofit to do. So the folks who become the ED, the executive director, are usually the ones with the vision, and they want to actually do the work. They're the ones that are like filling out the stuff for taxes every year. They're the one that's got to handle with the accounting and make sure, like they're the ones that, they're like, I really want it to be in the bellows in the building to figure out that, no, you got to go ahead and keep running this other stuff and get your stuff together with the IRS and get to. Now there's still some of that happens with the for-profit, but to me, what turned me off was just the managing of a board. And so for me, instead, the kind of for-profit model for me is more like consultants. So when you build a board, it's people who have these different expertise and that can support in any kind of way, in other kinds of ways. But instead, like, if I need this to be done, I can call on this person when I need them, and then I'll talk to you later. I can call them when I need them. If I need, instead of thinking about as a board strategically trying to figure out how to fundraise, how about we create events where we come together to figure out how can we raise money through these events, and those folks aren't necessarily interested in an event where folks don't really care about the tax write-off. And if I really, really want to do something with tax write-off, just use somebody as a fiscal sponsor. That's what I do. So if I wanted to do a project and I know there's a grant available, that's one thing we did here with the Entrepreneur Workshop Series. We had someone who had a nonprofit. We used them as a fiscal sponsor. Are you aware of that process?
Yes.
Okay. So use them as a fiscal sponsor. We give them a small fee. Thank you. And then he write the check right back to us. So he still has the board, he's still with us, and he can show on his books that he brought in this amount of money. Because on his books, it looks like they got this grant. So it helps them. Now, did they write the grant? No. I wrote the grant. I wrote in my fee for writing the grant. Most of the grant came to us. You got a small fee, but if he ever want to go up for other grants, he can say he got these other ones. Now I don't need to say that I got grants as a for-profit. So I don't care if I don't get recognized in that grant. He needs that. I don't need that.
Got you. I get it.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So I rather okay, I'm gonna do this grant. If I feel like putting in work in it, then I will put. Like, but I don't want to have to. Like, in order to keep the lights on for the nonprofit, I don't want to have to keep going after this government money.
Gotcha.
But if I'm feeling passionate about a project, okay, I'm gonna do this. Fiscal sponsor, write my fee in. To me, that works for me. So I'm just saying, as another option to think about.
No, that makes sense because I even because I know that eventually people are gonna want to start reaching out to the people that are being, I don't even like to say interviewed, like just talking to. I consider I eventually want to be able to maybe they can offer mentorships, or to like have a conference where if they wanted to sit down with you once a month, and you can offer that, or you can offer something specific. Just making a bigger network for people to communicate and to grow for everybody that's involved. Even like, I was talking to Marshall, and he told me the whole idea when they started, Creative Control Fest, and how that came about. Even if it's like, a Think Youth Conference where, because I wanted to be like kind of like a TED Talk in a sense, for people of color, where you can come and say, hey, these are the people that we have, they're going to be speaking, and I just think it'd be great for the city of Columbus. They don't give us money for that.
You can get a TEDx Youth license. It's free.
No, I did not know that.
Just apply. It's free. So that doesn't mean you don't come up with your own.
No, everything. No.
The reason I say that is because it's a brand that already has a following, and you won't have to do as much work to present something brand new to people.
Gotcha.
You can do a TEDx talk. You can do it one time and figure out a way to collect the information of folks who come, like the attendees, where they got to sign up email and let them know, hey, you want to see the same thing? Same things happen at Thank You. You see what I'm saying?
Gotcha, yes.
So the TEDx license is free. They do have stipulations that cost. Okay. For example, like you have to be able to stream it. You have to be able to record it. Okay. Now, if you have to know some videographers that can do it for the low, then that cost goes incredibly down. And if you look at TEDx Talk, the quality varies. And it doesn't even matter what the speaker is, whether it was Titi Amanda. Like, she looked like she was in front of a podium at, like, I don't know. The quality wasn't even great. And she's like international author. And then there was who's the rapper from Cleveland? The dang it.
It's a rapper.
Yeah.
She ain't gonna come.
No, he's like more kind of. This is gonna bother me. I see his face. Anyway, he did a TEDx talk, but it was in his high school. So it was like TEDx, whatever his name is. Kid Cudi. Yeah, Kid Cudi. So he's from Shaker Heights, and it was at Shaker Heights High School. So then whatever video equipment they already had at the high school, they just used that. And so, but it gets put up on the TEDx YouTube just like anybody else does. So I would suggest maybe doing 1 or 2 years of that, get a following. And if you want to start breaking off and doing your own thing and charge them just like you would charge the folks. And charge them.
Yes, ma'am. Depending
on experience. So now there's a lot of their TEDx that are free. But like the TEDx Columbus, those things are like $70.
Yeah, I think Speaks, and then my friend CJ is supposed to be speaking at the one that's coming up.
Yeah.
CJ's going to be speaking at the Tech Talk that's coming up.
The Whitehall, TEDx Whitehall. I mean, those tickets are a grip, and there are folks, because I worked on the Columbus, the TEDx Columbus one last year that Marshall spoke on. They filled the Rife Center. There's a following already here, and they did a TEDx like adult, and then they did TEDx where it was all high schoolers. So I'm saying there's a following already there, where folks are willing to pay. So I think the TEDx one was free, but I think it was free if you bought the other ticket. I can't remember. Okay. Either way, there's a following of people who are willing to listen. And especially if it's their family, they gonna pay the ticket, or at least give a couple.
My baby gonna be sticking. He come down, see my baby.
Or even if
y'all know, church, I got an announcement. My baby gonna be speaking next Thursday. I need to see everybody there. Everybody. Yes, deacons.
And even if the ticket is like $10,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like so that raises money. Let's say you do that a couple times. You save that up, then that funds the Think Youth later, where you'll still be charging, but you won't be depending on registration to reserve your space and get materials. You would already save that up.
Thank you.
Just a possibility.
It's a free game Friday.
Yeah, I think that would be cool.
I'm gonna keep reaching out to you. So just know.
Yeah, no problem.
I didn't. So if you didn't know, I'm transgender. Actually, the 21st will be 1 year I've been on testosterone, and I've never been a person who's like to be out front. And my wife and my friends like, oh, you need to record it. I don't want to do that. Like, this is not for real. I just want to finish this process. So, but then I started doing these vlogs. He was helping me. I started it because I have some artists that I manage, and they tell me, I said, my biggest thing is content equals data. Data equals value. The more content you create, the more data you have, and then that makes whatever you're doing have value to sponsorships in these companies that you're trying to reach out to these particular, target markets and things like that. And I kept telling them, I was like, you guys need to make content. Oh, I don't have this camera, I don't have this camera. And I got tired of hearing this. I said, you know what? Fine. I grabbed my iPhone, got the V20, got my iPhone, I started making videos and editing. Like, what are you using? My phone. I sat there and went out and recorded all day and then cut it, chopped it, posted the same night. There is no excuse with all the technology as to why content can't be made. So I started doing them, and then it kind of turned into something else. And then because I've always done social media marketing, but I've always handled other people's accounts. And so people would say to me, well, look at your account. I was like, yeah, my account is not important. Like, look at these accounts. This account has 33,000 followers. Like, do you see how active it is and how much engagement? That's what, we're focusing on. But then I had to understand, like you were saying before, you kind of have to. I realized I had to do it in order to push the brand, because Chris Dash Media is essentially me, like my idea, my passion.
I'm just trying to save this money up. I'm just trying to stack this money up. I'm just